this week's talk, What LCS Means to Me, presented by Alfredo, Diana, who you see here was next to me, Dimitru, and Sandra. Everyone has a different point of view, and that diversity of opinions is something that enriches us as a community. We invite you to join us next week to hear the vision of these people. They're the communication director and the development director and the Spanish teacher. So please join us to share what you experience with the Lake Chapala Society. For me, I know that it made a big difference in deciding to move here, was that it was here. Okay, this week's presentation. Paramhansa Yogananda, an Indian mystic in Lake Chapala, presented by Nayaswami Premdas and brought to us by Susanne, who brought him here. We're very grateful. Yogananda is the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the best-selling spiritual biographies of all time. In 1929, Yogananda came to Mexico. He met then with the president, Emilio Portes Gil, and visited Lake Chapala. While in Chapala, Yogananda wrote a poem dedicated to the lake. During this time, an iconic photograph of him aboard a sailboat was taken. Many expats here in Lake Chapala, I'm sorry about this, it really, and local Mexican residents are aware of Yogananda's visit to Lake Chapala, and there is a natural curiosity as to why he came here. Today we are going to learn all about it. Premdas, our guest speaker from Ananda Village in Northern California, will share his insights and reflections as to who Yogananda was and why his presence in the West is so important. This open circle presentation is the first in a series of events slated for Yogananda Week in Ajijic. That takes place between today and the 10th, so I'm sure we're going to hear about that. Please join me in welcoming Premdas.
Joy to all of you. It's a real honor and pleasure to be with you today. I just arrived in town 2 days ago, and what a lovely place on this planet you have here. It's exactly what I thought it might be, because, as you'll hear from my talk, my teacher, the teachings that I follow, came down here at one point, as was mentioned, and basically recommitted himself to changing what we consider to be sort of the modern world. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go. Some of you are already aware of Yogananda, and I've met a few of you already, and it's been my real delight. Hopefully we'll have a chance to meet each other also during the week as I moved around through my host, Susanne. She's got me booked at a few places this week, and if you're interested, you could ask her about some of those events. I just want to call up my notes here, and then I want to explain a little bit about why I think it's important that we're all here together today, not just me being here, but why you're here too. So first of all, I want to thank Open Circle and the Lake Chapala Society for having me down here. This path for me is one of sharing joy. And in fact, Yogananda was often quoted in one of his sayings as, "From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt." Those of you who know that, say it with me. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt. One more time. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. One of the contributions that Yogananda made is an explanation of spirit. And without getting into the religious overtones, because we have a very mixed crowd here, I'll be talking more about the actual philosophy and practices at other events. But today I wanted to focus on some of his unique contributions, as well as how he wound up down here. Yogananda took what were the ancient teachings of India, but let's just say the East and the West combined. He was designated by a group of teachers, of gurus, to come to the West and sort of inject into the religious conversations, the spiritual conversations, practical spirituality. And practical spirituality meant things that you could do every day. You didn't have to keep spirit and religion over here and keep your daily activities over here. And one of the ancient expressions in the Hindu tradition that he came from was, you are that, and God is existence, consciousness, and bliss. That's pretty heady stuff. And almost all the major teachings, philosophies, and religions deal with that. But he made it easy, and that's really one of the fortes of his life. One of his legacies is bringing spirituality into practicality. And he said spirit was not only existence, consciousness, bliss, but it's ever new existence, ever new consciousness, and ever new bliss. It doesn't end. It's being you. You are that. The Hindus say tattvam asi. That spirit has become you. And no matter what you want to establish in your life as spirit, that spirit has made you and it's in you. And you can feel it and you can know it. And that's the presumption that his teaching has for all of us. And it doesn't mean you have to join that tradition. All it means is he came to inspire the movement in the West towards higher consciousness. So first of all, I'm Nayaswami Premdas, as I was introduced. I live at Ananda Village in Northern California. We are an intentional community called a World Brotherhood Colony or community, established in the principles of Yogananda and the ancient teachings of not just India but of the West. We live in dharmic principles. We have, in our village where I live, which is now under quite a few feet of snow for the first time. Hallelujah, it's great, because we need the water. But I barely made it here, and that was kind of a miracle in itself. This leaving the property was difficult, but the community was established over 50 years ago through a gentleman named Swami Kriyananda, who was a direct disciple of Yogananda. And at some point back in the late 1940s, right near the end, he was at a garden party, not dissimilar to a location like this, with a mixed crowd, and Yogananda gave a stirring talk on the importance of establishing communities, north, south, east, and west. And to establish those communities so that people of like mind could find happiness, find joy, ever new joy. And it's so much easier when people come together to share common interests. And what is the common interest all of you have here? Is what? Aging, okay, aging. Okay, that's a very practical one, yes. Okay, but it's also, even beyond that, it's happiness. Everybody wants happiness, no matter their political leanings, their culture, their sex, their decision on relationships. Everybody's wanting happiness. And that eludes most people because people kind of get lost. So his prescription was to establish communities where people could feel supported. And I'll tell a little bit more about Ananda Village later and the Ananda Sangha worldwide, but that's where I come from. And I've lived there since the year 2000. I've been in a couple of our communities. We have communities around the world. And I lived in our Palo Alto community, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I've lived in Italy, in Assisi, home of St. Francis, right? And I got to be a tour guide for the sites of St. Francis, as well as being a chef in Italy. So the two biggest things in Italy, spirit and cooking, I got to participate. Why? Because seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added. All my little desires have been answered when I put spirit Again, whatever name you want. If you want to use God, if you want to use Divine Mother, if you want to use Jehovah, whatever name you want from your tradition, it's all the same. But seek that first, and all those things will be added. So that's really the basis of what the spiritual community I live in is. It's Yogananda had a term for that. He said, high thinking and simple living. And that was he made everything simple. That's what I like about this Hindu that came to the United States back in 1920. So, first question I have is, how many of you were already aware of Yogananda before you came here? Before you came to this event today? Okay. Wow. I'm glad to bring a lot of you together. And secondly, how many of you have actually read parts of or all of the Autobiography of the Yogi? The hands went up before I even asked. Okay, well, look at this community you have. People ask if there are communities for Yogananda around the world. Now, there are different organizations that present his work. Ananda is one of them. Self-Realization Fellowship is another. There's a couple other organizations and teachers from those traditions who've established on their own. Look at each other while you're here. Meet each other. Say hello. You have already a community here. And this is not about me promoting Yogananda per se for you. But for those of you who want that, who want what we call satsang, or gathering in truth, all you have to do is raise your hand again and look at each other. Why don't we do that? Raise your hand if you are interested in this, and look for each other later. Take a look. And the other thing that you're supported with when you have gatherings of people of like mind, of soul needs, is you can support each other in techniques or practices or lifestyles. And that is supported. That's called satsang. Satsang, rather, the gathering. And then also you have the sadhana, which is what I meant to say. You have sadhana, which is whatever practices you. How many of you meditate or do spiritual practices with pranayama, or you're doing the techniques from one tradition? Great. Well, that's another reason why you have come to this beautiful place, because when you're in an astral energy like this, when you're in a place like this with this amount of sun, with this amount of support, with the history of healing, and I'll talk about this in a minute, with the history of artists. You have, the founder, one of the founders of this organization was a flamboyant artist. I'll tell you a little bit more about somebody else later, but that's required. Okay, before I came to Ananda, before I joined the organization I work with, Ananda, I was living in Carmel, California. And it just struck me this morning that this reminds me very much of it. For those of you who travel the world, now the climate's a little different, but the environment is one of artistry, it's one of joy, it's one of light, it's energy. Remember that word, energy. There's energy here, and it's not just within you, which is true, but it's also in nature here. Yogananda had a chant he used called Spirit and Nature Dancing Together, based on an old Vedic song. Spirit and nature dancing together. And then it goes on and on and on. But basically, spirit and nature, aspects of spirit that have been materialized in our world to support us. Because with the energies like this, you have more opportunities to grow. And, when I was looking at the Lake Chapala Society and a little research I did before I came down, it's about self-empowerment. And that's exactly what this teaching is about. Not just this teaching, but true teachings of all religions. True teachings of all culture are to help us find that ever new, ever expansive, ever new joy. And it starts sometimes with each one of us, right? So, I didn't mention earlier, but I want to thank Kat for introducing me very nicely, but also for kind of warming you up. You're a hard act to follow, but a pleasurable one, and I appreciate it. So, again, I spent a lot of time in Carmel and the Bay Area of Northern California, and that's when I discovered my final path and my final I took vows actually to explain. A Nayaswami is basically like a Swami, but it's a new order. It means a new order of Swamis. And it was created to help any individual, not just people from Ananda or Yogananda's traditions, to have a goal and to adhere to it. So I practice certain techniques on a regular basis, and I also took a vow to Spirit, and that's my final vow. I also happen to be married, so that's the whole idea of the new order, and that's so that you can be whatever you want to be. And that's exactly why we're here. Each one of us is different in an artistic way. You're all very different from each other, but yet you have a lot in common. So we want to help each other in satsang. We want to encourage ourselves in sadhana, in spiritual practices. And then we also want to give service. It's called seva or karma yoga, as Yogananda called it, to each other, because that spirit that is within you is within the neighbor that you're sitting next to right now. It's within everybody from this podium all the way out to the left and to the right, north, south, east, and west. And those of you who have that message are channels. And so it's kind of a dual path, both being inward and being outward, but living in what is called dharma, or sort of moral principles, not in the traditional sense of like the Ten Commandments, where you shall or you shan't, but it's more, if you do this, or if you avoid this, you will have a happier life. You will find joy. So, a lot of you are here, I guess, because of the name Yogananda. And I'm pleased to be able to share with you today some of the things I've discovered. And some of you may know more than me on some of these items, because a little connection for you here is local. And it's a sort of a local legacy that I discovered in just trying to put together a talk a couple weeks ago. I came across a couple things that would make a really good story someday if somebody put it, if they haven't done it already, into a book form or into a play. And if you're interested or you know anybody like that, talk to my friend Susanne. She's somebody who could help with that. We've discovered a lot together over the last month. So Yogananda, for those of you who don't know, he was a yogi, an Indian, who came to the United States in 1920, and he was about 28, 29 years old, very young. He came on the first ship that sailed from Europe to the United States after World War I, on the ship called Sparta. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm going to mention is actually in the Autobiography of Yogi. And so if you really want the authoritative source on Yogananda, you can find this book online for free. You can buy the books. You can get them in all different colors. Different publishing houses put that out now, SRF, Ananda, and many others. It's sort of free out there. So there's no reason why you shouldn't visit it. And also, if you'd like more information on his background that I'm giving, you can go to ananda.org for almost anything I'm talking about. We have a really good website. That's the way to travel these days. I brought a lot of paperwork, but basically everything's on my devices now. So this man, this brown-skinned, long-haired Hindu with flowing robes, more than I'm wearing, with a scarf, with a real heavy accent, would attract thousands of people in the early 1920s up to the Depression, including Carnegie Hall, where he filled the auditorium. Now, granted, people wanted entertainment back then, just like you want entertainment now, and like we're doing a little bit today. This is fun for everybody to be entertained for an hour or so. But he was sent specifically to the United States because we were the harbinger at that time for expansion of thought and consciousness. In the roaring 20s, the roaring 1920s, picture in your mind, make it a little bit romantic, but anything goes. World War I had ended, the greatest calamity in world history. Technology had run rampant during the war, and it was still running, but there weren't many killings. People were giving up a lifestyle because of the trauma that they had gone through. They were rejecting old ideas. America, again, was the harbinger of the future. And Indian savants, not just from Yogananda's tradition, but many others, were starting to send delegations, if you would, swamis, to the United States and to the West to establish not their religion, but to establish higher consciousness. Swami Vivekananda came in the 1890s. He stayed a while. He established a place that I lived almost next door to in San Francisco, which I didn't realize until much later. But he established the Vedanta Society there, and that spread all around Los Angeles, all around the world. But he left a short while afterwards, and like Yogananda, he didn't have a very long life, but he had a very concentrated, purposeful, divinely, in my opinion, led life that affected not just followers of his, but people all around the world. The concept of Vedanta, the highest truths of spiritual scriptures and the way to live. Well, Yogananda was born in 1893. And he was born into a family of devout Hindus, but more importantly, he was blessed to find himself in a family of what in the tradition he came from is called Priyavans. And his mother and father were followers of someone called Lahiri Mahashaya. And many of you are shaking your head, yeah. And they were friends with, or had common friends with, many other spiritual leaders of that time in the Calcutta region of India. That Calcutta region of India spawned what is now the yoga community around the world. Many of the great instructors of yoga not only came from Calcutta, but they were based in Yogananda's family. The Ghosh family, Vishnu Ghosh's younger brother, made Hatha yoga and physical exercises popular about the same time that a gentleman who was named Sandow, famous at the turn of the century, was starting to show people how to work with energy. Well, Yogananda's family kind of took to working with dumbbells and working with weights, but also doing wrestling exercises. And if some of you are out there, are followers of Yogananda, you kind of know what I'm starting to do now. This is something he created called the rechargers, or later on he called them the energization exercises. And it developed from, in his family, doing these exercises, but trying to make them even more efficient. And it didn't even need to use weights. It just used willpower and energy. And one of the hallmarks of Yogananda's tradition is the greater the willingness, the greater the flow of energy. So for those of you who are healers, I know we've got a good healing community out here. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism, or we can say manifestation today. But these were kind of code words that he established and a process. And if you're a devotee of Yogananda, or you know some people who are, they're probably practicing these at least once, if not twice a day. And they're definitely working with the principles, because when you start learning about energy movement in the body, when you start associating with the flow of energy in you and identifying with it, you will almost naturally have better health, better wellness, and better moods. But it'll also help you, if you're a meditator, to go deeper in your meditation. And that's one of the kind of foundation principles, and if you hear about Kriya Yoga, that's kind of the base understanding. So this man, Yogananda, brown skin, considered to be black in those days. And that had an important consequence on him coming down here. Long robes. He would be off stage with an audience of thousands, and you can see photos of this. He traveled extensively over the United States during that time. And he just had learned English. He basically mastered English on the boat coming to the United States. He was asked to give a talk, and he got up in front of people and he froze. And after a while he started laughing, and then he asked his guru, his spiritual teacher, telepathically, support me. In other words, he tuned into Swami Sri Yukteswar, as it's called, and said, "You've got to help me here." And he got the message he could speak, and he just began speaking. It was his first formal talk in English on the boat just before he came the United States. And he was scheduled to come to the United States because he was invited by the Council of Religious Liberals, Unitarians and others, to represent the teachings of India. Sort of like I'm here talking about this today to you. We're a more eclectic crowd now. But back in the 1920s, they heard of Swami Vivekananda, who made a big splash in 1893 at the World's Fair and also at the same council. But Yogananda, through quite miraculous circumstances, at the last minute found out that he was designated to come and be that speaker. And he got the blessings from not only his teacher, Yukteswar, but he got the blessings and the promise, if you look at the historical incidences, from the two previous gurus before him. Some of it sounds pretty miraculous. I leave that up to you when you read the autobiography to understand. I see all this as being a code from the divine, a code from the existence, consciousness, bliss, which is called Satchidananda, that's encoded in myths, in real lives, in stories. But that message sent Yogananda to the West. And he didn't know what would become of that, but going back to the original guru of that lineage is called Babaji, which is just a nice endeared term for like an Indian teacher or father, someone with respect. But this mystical being is written about in autobiography, and Babaji in that tradition is thought to be the carrier and the supporter for these teachings throughout the ages. Again, I leave the mystical stuff to you. It's wonderful reading. The encoding that's in the autobiography, however you take it, will bring you more joy and more happiness and lift your consciousness up. So, Yogananda's on stage, okay? And I just pretend I've got that long hair and I'm dark-skinned and you're an all-white audience, all white, okay? Plain white. Wanting entertainment, and he would run on the stage and he would yell, "How is everyone? How feels everyone?" So let's do it one more time. So he would actually do that. He would run on stage with his orange robes and he would shout without a microphone, "How is everyone?" Okay, awake and ready. Let's try that. How is everyone? Awake and ready. How feels everyone? Awake and ready. And he would say, "Now we can begin." Why? Because he had to invoke and inspire the energy. He had to get you going because people would just sit and ready to receive. But the divine is reciprocal. The divine wants our love. As Yogananda said, that's the whole purpose of life, is giving spirit our love. And to receive it, we have to be open. And so just like Kat did a great job of getting you guys going with very good jokes, on the whole. On the whole. But that's perfect. That's the same reason he would do that. And all of Yogananda's techniques were basically based on affirmations and visualizations and working with the breath. So who is this man who was Mahatma Gandhi? He was a friend of Mahatma Gandhi. He actually gave Mahatma Gandhi the Kriya Yoga technique. He had major followers, personalities of his time. And most of you would know that Steve Jobs, George Harrison, Elvis Presley, Judy Collins, Ravi Shankar, these were either devotees or dear friends and supporters of what Yogananda was doing over the ages and became followers and practiced these things. Yogananda in his life met Rabindranath Tagore, for those of you who know that Indian author, Ramana Maharshi, Teresa Neumann, Mahatma Gandhi, I mentioned, and a great woman saint named Ananda Village. So that's a little bit you could read about. But in the 1920s, think about what it was like to establish this work that is now 100 years old. And that consciousness that was infused in our society has gone through the Americas and gone back around the world. In fact, India has a real resurgence. They didn't know who Yogananda was, most of the Indians. He'd been forgotten because he was here in the United States. He spent the rest of his life basically here except for a visit. Yogananda came to Lake Chapala at a major point in his life. He had been working for 9 years and established Self-Realization Fellowship and established a network of classes through the mail, which wasn't brand new at the time, but it was pretty revolutionary for spiritual teaching. He had huge numbers of followers all around the country, and in fact, even beginning overseas. One of his followers was in the music industry in New York and Washington, D.C., and that gentleman happened to pass away in 1929, and Yogananda was giving the rites for his funeral services. And at that service, the daughter of this man, Eleanor Sanger, some of you may know this story a little bit, or more than I do, approached Yogananda, and she was already a disciple, a devotee. She was part of the following that Yogananda had. She and her family had a home here in Lake Chapala. And Yogananda had come up against racism, against the economy. The 20s were starting to crash, okay? He was also being accused of being a black-skinned Hindu trying to violate American white women. I'm being blunt, that's what it was. It's just racism at the time. And people from other religions were also attacking him because he was making a dent in consciousness. He had a moment of crisis and he was looking to reground and recenter. Well, our friend, Eleanor Sanger, had a home here called Via Renera. And thanks to some of the local authors here, Tony Burton in particular, actually the house that he stayed at is the cover of the book. I don't think that's it. From my point of view, from where I come from, that's not a coincidence. All right, there's also a lot of her history in here and in other sources that I'll mention at the very end or in questions and answers. But he stayed here for almost 3 months. He didn't just fly in and fly out. He'd come down really, the inner story is he didn't come down for a vacation, like a joyful occasion. He was considering leaving the United States and his work, ultimately. He didn't know when he would return, and he left followers of his kind of confused. When he got down here, though, he discovered beauty, and he found the soul-satisfying nature, of the area. But back to the artist aspect of this talk. This woman, Eleanor, she was also known as Larusa. She was also known as Kiva St. Albans, and also Zara Alexeyeva. I can't pronounce the name right. She was said to be Russian, but she was really from the Bronx and of German-American descent. Both parents American, as far as I can tell. It's a wonderful story. She was a vibrant, a flamboyant character who left her mark untold on this big community. She was often seen riding her black stallion with really exotic garb on, black and red, all the way up to the time she died at about the age of 89, I believe it was, or 90. But there's stories here in the area that I guess you can find also information over at a restaurant called Nueva Posada, the hotel, and there are supposedly paintings in there and memorabilia from her life. But it took someone with that kind of energy to be able to bring what I consider to be a master of yoga, yoga meaning the union of us with spirit who knew it and could share it. It took her, basically, to bring him down here. She invited him to come down, and again, he didn't know if he'd stay here, go back to the United States, or go back to India. I'd like to read a poem that Yogananda wrote from his experience here. Well, many of you have seen this already. O Chapala, like the flickering flame of Indo skies, thy moods of limpid waters boisterously play with fitful gleaming storm, or rest on my shining forehead without a rippling wrinkle. 'Tis then thy silver shining mind, free of ruffling causes, a transparent mirror reflects just noble images of the green-dressed young and old hills, like tableau of drilling soldiers standing hand in hand with dwarf and tall heads, crowned with silver skies or fleecy clouds. I beheld the starry damsels beautifying their twinkling faces in the mirror of thy waters. How I watched in the flickering hall of lightning. Oh, what wild cloud-churned skies and bounding winds, rolling thunder peals, bursting vapor embankments. Having flooded that territory of waters, and having lashed thy spirit to rouse thy resting soldier waves to leap to furious fightings. Then again, when truce is signed with storm gods and roaring fury of the skies, I find a stray white sail charged with a vital breeze. O changing Chapala, the gleaming lightning of my feeling skies, I love thee as never before. Alas, Chapala, thy beauty will be snatched from my adoring skies by cruel duties of exacting life. But they will fail to take away thy beauty enthroned in me as joy forever. The stony arms of the palace by the banks enclosed a tract of thy loved waters. And 'neath the lone shady tree, standing on the spot between two sheets of water, off I sat with those unforgettable hours. When I beheld the infinite emerge from pale, unanswering walls of blue and unite my soul with thee, mountains, skies, and me. He published that in 1929 after he returned to the United States and continued with his legacy. His legacy involves World Brotherhood communities. His legacy involves how to start communities, which is something Ananda has sort of specialized in. And it doesn't mean you have to join Ananda, but I'm just holding this book up as a reference. But Swami Kriyananda wrote this book over the years called The Need for Spiritual Communities and How to Start Them. So a lot of these things that I'm mentioning, resources again are at ananda.org, and they're also through our publishing house, Crystal Clarity Publishers, and a lot of it's free. One of the things that we live by at Ananda that I often end my emails with is from my direct teacher, Swami Kriyananda. We are part of a great tide of loving, joyful energy that wants to give and give as long as people are happy to receive it. And Yogananda's mission, in my opinion, if you had to sum it up in 2 words, would be divine friendship. Because the spirit that's made each of us lives within each of us, and it's accessible. And when I look at a face, the divine is there. The divine is in me. Tattvamasi, you are that. Satchidananda, ever new joy. There's a song we sing at Ananda. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. Join me. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. Now whisper, from joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. I want to thank a few sources here. Obviously, Crystal Clarity Publishers, which keeps a lot of the articles and materials on Yogananda and books, sayings, biographies, the whole thing. There's a gentleman who lives in this community part of the year, Tony Burton, whose books gave me a lot of the local information, which I wasn't able to share all with you, but please delve into that. Local gentleman, if he might even be here, Jim Cook, who I read an article from, or read a pomade. And of course, a gentleman who I'd recommend if you really want to see a biography of Yogananda, the day-to-day stuff, Philip Goldberg, a dear friend of Ananda's and Self-Realization Fellowship and Yogananda devotees everywhere. He's great. He's an author. He's got an actual biography of Yogananda, and it kind of tells it like it is. And of course, my teacher, Swami Kriyananda, who has helped promote the expansion of World Brotherhood colonies. And finally, to all of you, by both new and old divine friends, it's my honor and pleasure to be with you, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Really beautiful. So if you'd like to ask a question, we like the thought of questions more than your philosophy, your ideas, your chronology, your life history. Not that they're not beautiful. But if you'd like to ask a question, if you please raise your hand. And I will bring the mic around, just like this.
I was wondering, when you said that Yogananda came here after having experienced conflict and issues of turmoil with people who were around him, I think everybody faces that at different times in their lives. And I was wondering, from your knowledge and experience, how did he approach people who confronted him directly? And it obviously took its toll on him because he came here to regenerate, which is normal. But I just want to have a little more insight into what you understand about that process that he lived, that he went through as a human being facing that kind of darkness around him.
That's a very good question. And in specific, one of the things that got him down here was what he considered to be a betrayal of himself and of the teachings. Without getting into too much detail on that, so it was a very personal thing. This was a childhood friend who he'd brought to the United States to help him run his organization. And at that point, when that gentleman left, working with Yogananda, he also established his own group, right, practically on the doorsteps of what Yogananda was doing. But also, Yogananda had been confronted with being run out of Florida as a black man talking to a black audience, and was accused by a large part of society, powerful society in Florida, of trying again to hoodwink white women into following him. And there was a lot of press at that time in the 1920s, just like it is today. We actually had very parallel times and parallel stories. We don't know the full stories behind incidences, and I'm not going to judge anything, but that's what he had to confront. And so he had to get away to have an environment that would support him. At the same time, he always said he loved that gentleman. And everything I've read and believed, Yogananda thought of him as his divine friend throughout his whole life, and said that they'd been together in many lifetimes. And Yogananda had that relationship with almost everybody that he had encountered. He always insisted on finding the good, and he would say, you know, that's their outer attachments, that's their outer personality, but that's not who they are. Unfortunately, they're going to have to suffer because I've got to let them go because they have to learn their lessons. One of my teachers said about karma, what is good karma, what's bad karma? Good karma takes you to spirit. Bad karma keeps you away. So even when you have incidences and circumstances and society-altering events or end-of-the-world events, don't focus on the bad. And this is not just pie-in-the-sky philosophy. Focus on the soul nature of the people. Focus on the divine that's within your soil, in your lake, in your household, in your relationships. See the best in each other and lift them up. A master creates their own environment. So Yogananda had to reset. He'd also been working hard. He'd been traveling incessantly for 9 years. When he had that, I, as well as many of you here, have had those moments in life where there was a crack, everything fell apart, and you had one thing left, and that was your courage to stick with your principles and to stick with honor and what the Indians would call dharma, right moral precepts, the things that work. And when you really give a heartfelt, energetic, you have to will it. Will your energy, focus it, bring it up, in fact, literally bring it up to the forehead, your heart and your forehead, and blast it out, and talk to spirit. I'm not saying spirit's a guy up there. I'm saying spirit is us. Talk to spirit. I learned that from my grandmother, and Yogananda confirmed it for me. And when I screamed at Yogananda, and he said, by the way, you can yell at God, yell at Divine Mother, she can take it. You're her child. You can do anything you want. She's going to spoil you. So you can yell at God, and God has to answer. You don't want her gifts, you want her alone. Love, peace, joy, calmness, wisdom, light, sound. And I'm leaving one out. Yogananda said there's 8 aspects of that Satchidananda of ever new joy. And if that answer is there, put more energy into it. If it's not there, see the person with that energy anyway. And it's an opportunity for growth. When we have disappointments, our biggest disappointments are our greatest opportunity.
Hi. I've heard it said that Yogananda predicted that someday this area would become a great spiritual center. Is there any truth to that?
Okay, so we're all divine friends, right? So he was very complimentary about the area, and he found spirit here. But literally from what I've seen, and I'm pretty much, I have access to a lot of sources from many different places. He didn't say those exact words, but I'll put it to you this way. That what I talked about before, the encoding that comes from the divine to us, he came down here as a master already, as a master of himself, being self-realized. He brought that energy down here. Now, he may not have been the only self-realized master down here. Don't know. But all it takes is one to infuse the area. So just by his presence here, witnesses today. I had no idea how many people show, 5, 10, 20, 30, but many of you raised your hand saying you knew Yogananda or were actually practicing his techniques or followers. Yeah. So he didn't say those exact words, but wherever he went, he left an energetic force. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Have time for one more question? Or are you satisfied?
I have a question.
Yeah, way in the back.
So I probably don't need a microphone.
You do for us to record it.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank
you
you.
do it for
Just
you.
wait a minute.
Okay.
I'm coming.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the realm of Jesus and Christ consciousness and the second coming of Christ and all of the writings and teachings related to Christ and Christ consciousness, I'm curious as to whether Yogananda was adapting the Hindu teachings specifically through that vehicle to reach his audience, or was that truly something that he was feeling from his own heart, or that was his guidance? How did that all come to be? Because obviously he didn't start teaching about Christ in India.
This is one of the major tenets of Yogananda's stay in the West. For our Western religions of the teachings of Jesus and Christianity. Yogananda was sent here to also show the unity of the highest teachings of Hinduism, Vedanta and Yoga, and the highest teachings of Christ as expressed through Jesus and others. And actually, Yogananda was predicted to come to the West to share the teachings of the Christ consciousness and the teachings of Krishna through this character called Babaji, this great saint. And his teachers, Yogananda's teachers specifically, Swami Sri Yukteswar, wrote a book called The Holy Science, which many of you may know about, and it's not the easiest book on the first couple reads to get. It took me till about 2 years ago to finally grok the concept. I agreed with all of them, but I hadn't really gotten through the language, and somehow it made sense to me. That really talks about, that book talks about the Christ consciousness. Babaji had told Swami Sri Yukteswar to write a book showing the teachings. And Yukteswar, who spoke completely good English, used to lecture to his ashram on the teachings of Jesus, because it had nothing to do with culture. And so Yogananda, yes, he embodied that too. And Yogananda implied, and one of the highest points of the teachings is that the Christ consciousness is within each one of us. It just may not be awakened yet. And that's the true message of Jesus, not to say how great he was, but to show what awaits us. Yogananda had a term called unlimited possibilities. Nice modern term. The unlimited possibility is that you can awaken that Christ consciousness. You can awaken the light of God. It's in you. And then how can you do it? Well, stay in touch with me and I can help you out there, and so can my friend Susanne. It's been a real pleasure to be with you today.